So let's get into it. So just a little bit about myself and Our Minds Work. Like I said, I'm the founder and managing director at Our Minds Work, but I've worked in health and social care for over 20 years now. But Our Minds Work are basically a team of specialists who are, our sole aim really is to create mentally healthier workplaces that can thrive. We all have a specialism in health and social care and have been able to bring all of our knowledge, skills, qualifications and experience into the workplace mental health field. We do this by designing and delivering evidence-based programs for culture change, and we do this into all industries. And we do this by creating a program for culture change that's targeted at all levels from CEO to frontline staff. This is so that we make mental health education, skills, behaviours and tools accessible to everyone, especially including groups of people who may be harder to engage, and exactly why we're here today. I'd just like to introduce Paul from ManHealth, who will tell you a little bit about himself and ManHealth.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to meet you all. My name's Paul. I'm Paul Bannister, founder and director of ManHealth. ManHealth, I hope you might have heard of us. If you haven't, you can check us out on our website or Facebook, which would be great if you could do that. So we support men across County Durham and Darlington and Northumberland. We provide peer support groups that are run 6 nights a week. We also have a virtual peer support group, which is on a Sunday evening, which any man can attend from even if they're outside the region. We also have a web chat and connect service, which is open 7 nights a week, 365 days a year, where we have trained facilitators who will talk to men, and that's open from 6 till 10 every evening. And lastly, we provide training to businesses, schools and colleges around men's health inequalities.
Thanks, Paul. So then, why are we actually here today? We have noticed that there are a large number of health disparities for men, especially around mental health. Working in health and social care for over 20 years, I've actually seen this throughout my experiences working in services, all the way from working with children and young people in looked after care and in secure training environments. The majority of young people in these services were young men. Moving forward into adulthood, working in drug and alcohol services, homelessness services, dual diagnosis services, the majority of service users were men. We are going to go into a little bit of depth around why some of these issues happen for men. And it's really important that we raise awareness of these mental health disparities specifically so that you can help to tackle them in the workplace. We're also going to do a little bit of myth busting today. Sometimes when people think that they know something around mental health, it can actually create a myth and even more stigma. So, for example, one that we hear quite often is that men just need to talk more often about their problems and cry more. It's okay to cry, but actually what this does is it creates a myth that men can cry and talk about their feelings just the same as women can. And that then leads young men and adult men to feel like there's something wrong with them if they're unable to do that. We also want to be able to tackle some of this stigma by doing this myth busting. When we tackle stigma, it helps us to create a trust and make sure that people are not discriminated against for actually coming forward and talking about their mental health. So we need to create that safe environment for men. We also want to make sure that we're supporting men before they reach crisis, and we're going to take you through the process of how poor mental health can actually evolve into severe mental illness where suicide is a potential risk for men. So we want to be able to engage men much, much earlier on and help them to engage through a process that we're going to show you today through evaluation, collaboration, and helping people to take ownership so that we're supporting them much earlier through early intervention. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Paul?
No, I think you've covered everything there, Emily. That's great.
Lovely. So we're going to run a first poll for you today. This first poll is just about why are you actually here, just so we can get a little bit of an idea of what interested you in today's session. So you'll see the poll pop up there. Sorry if it doesn't, there's nothing I can do about that. But what are you hoping to get out of today? You can choose as many as you like. Maybe it's a better understanding of men and mental health, how to include men's mental health into your wider mental health or wellbeing strategy. Maybe you're looking for inspiration for a campaign, possibly better understanding of where you can actually signpost employees. Maybe you're not sure, but it looked interesting, or something else. If it's something else, pop it in the chat box. You'll see that we're using the chat box today, so feel free to ask any questions, connect with us or with other attendees by making statements in there. And we will have time for question and answers at the end, where we will check that all questions have been answered. So just a few more seconds for people to vote, and then I'll end the poll and I'll share those results. So
if one wants to meet me, but better this morning.
Could you all just please make sure that you are on mute? This is just to stop any background noise.
It looks like everyone's 17 out of 18 have voted there, Emily, so okay. Great response.
Yeah, great, thank you. Let's share the results there. So as you can see from the results, we have the majority of you in today with 71% looking for information and guidance on how to include men's mental health in your wider strategy. Brilliant. Hopefully we'll definitely give you some of that information today. 59% here to have a better understanding of men and mental health. Excellent. We're hoping to do that today as well. And 41% requiring a better understanding of where we can signpost employees. So with ManHealth here today, Paul will be telling you a little bit about the services that they provide and the areas that they provide them in. However, if you are outside of the Northeast, there may be other services quite similar to what ManHealth do that can also provide that signposting for employees as well. Inspiration for a campaign, brilliant. We're definitely going to cover some ways and principles to get you thinking about how you actually engage men in your campaign planning. So thank you for engaging with that. Okay, let's move on. So we know why we're here, but actually what's the problem? We do have another little quiz for you. This time, we just want a little bit of an idea on your thoughts, your views, your understanding around men and their mental health. So we have some true and false questions for you to do here. It should have just popped up on your screen. So question 1, more women than men attempt suicide. Is this true or false? Number 2, men cry less than women because of stigma. Number 3, less men than women are diagnosed with common mental health problems. Number 4, more men than women abuse drugs and alcohol to cope with poor mental health. And number 5, men die by suicide more often than women because they don't ask for help when they're in crisis. Question number 6, more men than women are diagnosed with schizophrenia. And number 7, men are less likely to accept talking therapies than women. Sorry, I am just going to have to put somebody on mute there as I can hear them. Okay, done. So, a couple of questions to get you thinking there. Some of these are connected to some really common myths around mental health for men. Some of them are a little bit of a tricky question. Some of them you may not know at all and just be taking a little bit of a guess at. Now, some of them you may have a little bit more insight to. So I'm really interested to see where everybody's level of education and understanding is around this. So we've got 52% have voted so far. There's a lot of questions here, so I am going to give us a little bit extra time for people to finish the quiz. We're then going to talk through the answers and give you some more information specifically around these topics. Okay, just literally 15 more seconds and then I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Lovely. Thank you very much for voting, for those who voted. Let's share the results. So question number 1 here, more women than men attempt suicide. So well done to the 43% that said it was true. When it comes to myths around suicide, this tends to be a pretty kind of well-known one, and that's because men die by suicide at a much higher rate than women. However, when we look at the attempts for suicide, women attempt suicide at a much higher rate. Across the world, every 40 seconds, somebody dies by suicide. The majority of those deaths are men. However, for every 1 suicide that is a death, there are around about another 20 attempts that don't succeed in death. So when we're looking at 21 attempts every 40 seconds, the majority of those attempts are actually women, but unfortunately 3/4 of the actual deaths by suicide are men. This then sometimes leads to a little bit of a myth that, men don't ask for help. That's why men die by suicide more often, when actually what the research points to is that it's usually the means of suicide that can actually be, for men, much quicker and much more fatal, leaving no opportunity for intervention once that attempt has started to make place. So number 2, men cry less than women because of stigma. Oh, well done to the 1 person that said false. I'd be really interested in hearing in the chat box, why you actually put false. We don't really necessarily still understand why we actually cry. However, there is a little bit more understanding on the biology and protective factors when it comes to emotions, especially emotions that make us cry. There has been a lot of research done more recently with people who are transitioning from male to female. And what they've actually started to see is that women who were transitioning to male and actually taken testosterone find that they are less emotional and cry less often, and vice versa. So the men who were taking estrogen as they're transitioning into a woman will experience more bouts of crying, feeling more emotional. So actually the biology of our bodies actually mean that for men, they do find it a lot harder to cry because their biology there through testosterone, get my teeth in, has a protective factor for it. They also have lower levels of prolactin as well, which can also create lower levels of wanting to cry. Obviously, when men do cry and do show emotion, there has been a lot of stigma around this and that kind of man up scenario. So it's not just because of stigma. There are actually biological things that impact that. But what that actually means is if we tell men they just need to cry more and be more like women, this then can lead them to thinking that there's something wrong with them because they're not crying. Less men than women are diagnosed with common mental health problems. So well done to the 71% who said it was true. And the question here is diagnosed. When we look at health in general, men are less often actually attend the doctors for any type of diagnosis, never mind a mental health problem. So this is kind of general health as well. And what we tend to see with the difference between men and women, men will access doctors much later on in health problems rather than women will engage in doctors' treatments much earlier. So this means that when it comes to a diagnosis from a GP, men do tend to attend GPs with common mental health problems less often. That doesn't mean that they experience it any less. So question number 4, more men than women abuse drugs and alcohol to cope with poor mental health. Well done to the 100% of people that said true. And again, this is never just as simple as we first think it is. Working in drug and alcohol services for many years, what we tended to notice were a lack of protective factors from drug and alcohol abuse. So when we see the majority, is around about 85%, male attendees of drug and alcohol services, there tends to be a lack of protective factors. Those protective factors would be positive relationships, no work, high levels of unemployment, nothing meaningful to do with the time, boredom, and a lack of community support, especially support with family as well, a lack of relationships, positive relationships in their lives. So when we look at drug and alcohol use, not only can it be used to kind of self-medicate around mental health problems, there are a lack of protective factors there that can actually create a scenario where using drugs and alcohol is actually a very easy thing to do to deal with mental health problems, but also boredom and a lack of fulfillment and meaning in their lives. Number 5, men die by suicide more often than women because they don't ask for help when they're in crisis. So this is, again, another massive myth. As I've just said before, we've touched on it there. What we have found through research is there was quite an extensive piece of research done on people asking for help or engaging in primary services, healthcare services, up to 12 months before a suicide attempt happens. And what they found was that 96% of people, this is both men and women, had actually been to their GP and primary care service before, up to 12 months before they actually attempted suicide. Men do actually ask for help, but it may be that they're asking in a way that isn't being recognised as crisis, or there's just not the support there that's available. And Paul will probably back me up here from his experiences of working at ManHealth. When we hear the stories of men in crisis who do actually go and ask for help, there isn't the help that can actually help them there. So they may be provided with medication rather than the skills or tools to be able to support themselves through a crisis. There's a lack of support networks around them, and it is harder for them to get into services that will actually work for them. Number 6, more men than women are diagnosed with schizophrenia. So this is actually false. It tends to be no kind of gender disparity when it comes to schizophrenia being diagnosed. However, men and women will experience schizophrenia differently. Men generally tend to experience it much earlier on in teenage years, where for women, there is also a second peak. They experience it a little bit later in their early 20s, and then there is a second peak again around about menopause. So there is also more research going on to understand actually, when it comes to the biological differences between men and women, are some of our hormones a protective factor or a risk factor for how we experience mental ill health as well? Men are less likely to accept talking therapies than women. Well done to the 93% that said true. When we look at talking therapies, it's around about 39% of men will actually accept and complete talking therapies. It doesn't tend to hit the mark when it comes to what men actually want from recovery services. So there's a lot in there. And I think what we've done is made it very, very clear that when it comes to men's mental health, it's actually really complex. I mean, mental health is complex in itself, but we do need to get under some of these complexities if we really want to engage men in services to help to create early intervention and prevention. I'm now going to hand over to Paul, he's going to talk a little bit about why some of these issues might be occurring.
Thanks, Emily. Again, Welcome everybody again. This is from a little bit of research I've done. It may well be that some of you think differently to this, but I just really feel, and I know Emily agrees with me a little bit on, well, a lot on this. It's to do with the evolution of men and our society, and how our society's evolved in the last 20 or 30 or 40, 50 years actually. So it changes our economy since the 1980s. Well, in the 1980s, there was a huge structural change in how things were viewed in the economy. Up to the 60s and 70s, most economists had read and were listening to John Maynard Keynes and about how his vision of, life should get better the more technology improves and the more scientific advances there are, and we should be moving towards in the economy in the 2020s, where people should be doing less work and spending more time on leisure and, doing things that fulfill them. In my view, unfortunately, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan had an opposing view to that, and they introduced the neoliberalism approach to the economy. And if anyone's read about Margaret Thatcher really believed that everyone had to keep busy, and a great economy was keeping busy. And even in a leisure time, she used to be busy all the time. So Margaret Thatcher's leisure time would be painting the house or painting the living rooms and things like that. She really believed in people keeping busy. And that structural change in our economy evolved into the decline in manufacturing. I mean, manufacturing accounted for over 40% of the economy in the 1980s. We've now moved to a service-led economy where 80% of our output is services. And my belief is that men haven't evolved enough into getting used to them changes in our economy. And men aren't geared up to fit in very well in the services economy. And what we're looking for in the services economy, we're looking for people who have, they can display real professionalism, they can display commitment, enthusiasm, they align with the goals of the organization. You're looking for team players, people who are optimistic, friendly, aspirational, people who are extrovert, people who can communicate with customers. And yet we have a society where men are deterred from a very early age from showing their emotions and communicating with people, and it's a real dilemma within our economy. And so the service industry, I believe, is sometimes not really geared up or an ideal situation for men to be working in. And if there's 80% of our economy is made up of the service economy, then that's going to cause huge problems for men. And there's been before this seminar, we're looking at a recent survey, and it said that in 2018, 55% of British workers felt under excessive pressure. They felt exhausted or regularly were miserable at work. And nearly 40% of British workers felt that their job makes no meaningful contribution to the world. And most startlingly, the one that really shocked me was that 46% of men said they believed their jobs to be entirely meaningless. So you've got 50% of men going to work on a daily basis, doing something that they don't believe in and they don't want to be doing. Obviously, that's going to affect the productivity. It's going to affect it. You're going to have huge cases of presenteeism in the workplace. It may well lead to absenteeism. So that's a huge issue with the changes in our economy and the changes to the work and lives of the population. Alongside that, you've got the introduction of the gig economy. You've got people on temporary contracts. You've got people on moving jobs much more regularly than they used to in the 70s and 80s. People used to have jobs for long periods of time, where now the average length of a job is 6 years. There's much less job security. And you put all them things together with this the men doing work that they don't find meaningful. then these could lead to huge problems within the workplace. So, the point I'm trying to make is, the society and the economy that we currently live in is not ideally suited to men, because we haven't really evolved from what we are, from our primeval instincts. We are hunter-gatherers, and the economy doesn't allow us to fulfill our primeval instinct of making things and doing things as it used to. Do you want to add to that, Emily?
Thanks, Paul. And I think this actually plays out a little bit, especially in the research that Samaritans have done, where when it comes to the risk of suicide, we see a specific age group, which tends to be kind of middle-aged men who are under low socioeconomic status, so either unemployed or low levels of financial access, working class, high levels of boredom, high levels of drug and alcohol abuse,
low levels of education,
problems with relationship breakups at that time as well. So when we're actually seeing the risks for suicide in men at that specific age, we're also seeing these lack of protective factors as well. So when it comes to in the workplace, thinking about your workplace as an ecosystem, it is a human ecosystem, your workplace. We can actually look at it under the social ecological model. And this means that we don't just look at the individual, we have to look outside of the individual, look at the networks that they have around them, making sure our policies and procedures and the way that we design work and the environment actually help to create a healthy, thriving ecosystem. And I talk about that a lot in different sessions, but I think it's just worth kind of keeping in mind here when we're thinking about creating a mentally healthy workplace. How do we actually really pay attention to some of this stuff that we know so that we can engage people in more meaningful work and actually create protective factors, especially for men? Thanks, Paul. So with that kind of ecosystem in mind, our Mind's work have designed what we call the Eco Model. And this is literally just 3 steps to help to engage people for better mental health. And I'm going to explain a tool which we actually designed and piloted with ManHealth, which was designed specifically for men, to help men to evaluate their own mental health and communicate that and collaborate with others for better recovery. So what the Eco Model stands for is E is evaluate. When we can evaluate or risk assess our mental health, this really helps us to get a good idea of where we are and recognize areas where we can improve. Collaborative care comes from the health and social care world, and collaborative care actually creates better outcomes for recovery. A lot of the research done with men who are struggling with their mental health, experience emotions like shame, and they feel isolated and don't feel as if they have the social networks around them. Then we have ownership. And empowering and encouraging ownership of our own actions for change is really how we create behaviour change. This has given people the skills, tools and knowledge to actually look after their own mental health and know why they need to do that, the benefits and what works for them. So what we're going to do is kind of go through a model that we designed with men in mind and evaluated it and trialed it with some of the men from the Man's Health groups. So evaluate, helping men to risk assess their mental health. A lot of the research when it comes to health risk assessment in general for men, it tends to be much worse than when it comes to risk assessing our health for women. Like I said, they find it much harder to get early intervention with diagnosis. And this is just general health across the board, not even kind of mental health. So when it comes to mental health, we've designed the Mental Health CONTINUUM tool as a very, very simple color-coded way of being able to evaluate where your mental health is now and things that you can do to actually move towards the green section, which is good mental health. So as you can see here, we have a traffic light system from green, which is good mental health, all the way through to red, which is a mental health crisis. At Our Minds Work, we don't like to talk about labels and diagnoses, especially when it comes to talking about mental health with men. Sometimes these diagnoses can cause a lot of stigma. The DSM, the Bible for mental illness, actually had being gay or lesbian as a mental illness until the 1980s. And if we look at the Pride movement, that Pride movement have actually had to battle against the stigma of being told that if your sexuality wasn't normal, then there was something mentally wrong with you. So sometimes these labels aren't really helpful when we're trying to tackle stigma. So our CONTINUUM model looks at level of distress rather than a label that may hold stigma for people. So you can see here, yellow, I'm not feeling myself, is where we're reacting to stresses. This is a very normal reaction to have to excessive pressures and demands that are put upon us. In the orange section, we're looking at where we're actually unwell. This is where we're unable to function normally because of the levels of distress that we're experiencing. These may be emotional, these may be excessive or more use of alcohol and drugs to deal with the emotional distress. This may be around having thoughts and feelings that people are finding it difficult to cope with. But the key here is that they're unable to function normally. So it will actually be impacting their ability to do normal day-to-day things, like going to work, like getting out of bed, like even feeding yourself. And in the ill section there, this is where somebody's experiencing an emotional crisis. And we can see here that we can see symptoms that are very, very much connected to a risk of suicide, and may even include having thoughts and feelings that you want to escape or want to actually, carry out a suicide attempt. I've explained that extremely quickly in about 60 seconds, and I hope it's made sense for you. But what you can see is when we explain this to men and women as well, anybody can use it. It is made for everybody. It's very simple to use. But what we can then do is, if I saw you all in 2 weeks' time and I said, oh, where are you on the CONTINUUM model today? All you would need to do is answer in a colour. And because we both understand this tool, we both know what that means. This means it's much easier to communicate where our levels of emotional distress are without having to label them, without having to think about the profound feelings or emotions that people may be experiencing, but not be able to actually communicate them to somebody else or even recognize them in themselves. So this really helps to give men a very simple and easy way of risk assessing and evaluating their own mental health using this CONTINUUM and the traffic light system. I hope that's made sense. But when we trialed it with the guys, it was like a light bulb moment. They were telling us, this really works. And I know that, Paul, in the ManHealth sessions, you actually use this as a tool on a regular basis for the guys to actually have a check-in.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the big problems with men is their inability to be able to articulate how they're feeling. And this model really, really helps with that, because as Emily said, they can just point to a color, and men, when they go and see, they haven't, in many cases, they haven't a clue that they're really, really unwell. They are terrible at being able to risk assess both mental and physical health. But if they go and see a GP, if a GP had this tool, which I know Emily's very, very keen to get this out to all GPs and all workplaces, it just makes it easier for men to be able to articulate how they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, when we're saying men, we are talking about the average man. We're talking about the bell curve. We know that there are some men that find it very, very easy to risk assess and talk about their mental health and emotions. We're not saying that this is all men. If you do know anything about the bell curve, we're talking about people in the average, not at the extremities. So then kind of moving into, once we've evaluated, we then need to look at what solutions we can put in place. A lot of the research shows that men can experience a lot of isolation. Men are, do find it much harder to have the social networks that women do, and their conversations when they are in those social networks will be very, very different to the conversations that women have. And I always like to think about, again, our biology, we are great apes. I think we've sometimes forget that we have evolved from chimpanzees. We are internally that at heart, and yet our brain has evolved so brilliantly. There are parts of our DNA that just haven't evolved out of that. And I always like to think about, going back to you kind of hunter-gatherers days when, Homo erectus, was first in their tribes. What were the men doing and what were the women doing? The men were probably out, hunting, gathering, doing all of the things that they were able to do to provide for the tribe and provide for their families. And the women would have been looking after the children, pregnant, breastfeeding, and sat around talking and solving problems. So I find it really interesting how we do see some of that evolution still when it comes to how we actually collaborate, and we do it in different ways. So what we want to be able to help men to access support earlier so that it lowers isolation. One of the things that men really like to get out of doing things is achievement. So this tool, the second page of the tool, then begins to help you to look at how am I getting better, which means that we're moving from the red down to the orange, down to the yellow, down to the green. There are also things that I can take control of. There are actions that I can take. There are things that I can do to actually feel like I have some control and autonomy over my own recovery, so that it actually creates that feeling of control and strength around being able to engage in things that do help my mental health. So you can see in each of the section, there are different things that we can do, and what we want to be able to do is actually build on them. When we have good mental health, that's brilliant, but we have to keep it like that. So what are some of the things that men can do that we know they enjoy engaging in? So things that are meaningful to them and give them pleasure. Talking to people who they trust. Trust is a massive thing for everybody, but especially men. Building trust. People are not going to talk about their mental health or the problems if they don't trust the person or the service that they're there to speak to. When it comes to the yellow section and reacting to stressors, this is where there are generally triggers. Something is causing our mental health to be out of the equilibrium. So we need to look at tackling those problems. We're not experts on everything. How can we find access to experts? How can we talk to people we trust, friends, family, even people at work, like a manager who we know is able to help us? Obviously, our physical health and mental health, really are part and parcel together. So are we doing enough of those things to make sure we're getting enough sleep and exercise and healthy eating? But again, are we spending enough time doing the things that we enjoy, our hobbies, our interests? Is work meaningful to us? Or are we leaving work at the end of the day feeling extremely stressed and low in what we're actually trying to achieve? And then we go home, and a lot of people working from home at the moment, in the way that workplaces have evolved, that sometimes it's much harder to disconnect from these things. Do we have the financial means to enjoy our interests and hobbies? Consider a stress risk assessment if it's work-related stress. You may have an EAP that we should be, promoting regularly, as they do provide a lot more services than just talk and therapies. And when it comes to men and initiatives, we do have some information on what men do want to see from your initiatives, but activity-based group initiatives that they can get involved in. In the orange section, obviously, this is where somebody is actually experiencing a high level of mental and emotional distress and probably needs professional care and treatment here. So we have some actions that people can take there. Engaging in support groups like ManHealth and any other kind of support groups that may not just be around mental health. These may be activity groups like five-a-side groups. following any treatment plans, and also consider, if it's in the workplace, helping to support men with a stay well at work support plan. And you've got OcuHealth and EAP that you can refer to as well. In the red section, obviously, this is extremely serious. This is where people need urgent care and a treatment. And we do have some guidance there for someone to access their own help, or if they're unable to keep themselves safe, to call emergency services or speak to somebody that they can trust to help them. So what you can see here is we want people to be encouraged to do something for themselves. We want them to be encouraged to collaborate on professional services, but also other activity-based groups, support in the workplace, and additional support groups to reduce those levels of isolation. So one of the hardest things of working in health and social care is actually helping people to take ownership for the recovery. You know, if you have ever been mentally unwell yourself, the further along that continuum towards the red we go, sometimes the harder it is to engage in some of these actions. So this is why early intervention is so important, so that we're providing positive interaction and positive activities and practices much earlier on, and focus on how do we stay mentally well, because it becomes much harder to do when we become unwell. So we want to be able to encourage men to take ownership of their actions for better mental health. So when it comes to the workplace, I know a lot of you in here today are looking for guidance on mental health initiatives and how do you actually engage men. So this is some research by, again, the Samaritans, of what men want. This is what they want to help them to engage in these types of initiatives. These are 5 principles that you can follow. So one of the first things is to use activities to engage conversation. You know, we know that men love doing things, developing skills, you know, actually creating something. It's meaningful. It's actually given activities to do. When I used to work with young men and young women in looked after care, I always carried a pack of cards around with us. I'm a little bit of a card demon, but what I found was if people were struggling to engage in conversation and interventions, I would always go, shall we play cards? And I'd teach them a new game of cards, which we would play and actually have a conversation at the same time. This really helps, especially young men, to engage in something meaningful. They feel like they're doing something, they're learning something new, but actually help to engage that conversation. Make it accessible, fun and welcoming. So if you are a workplace who are very male dominated, but it's kind of trades, you know, they're out there doing the job, they've been very engaged in the workplace, maybe it's on a construction site. How do you make those accessible for them if they don't have access to emails, the internet? How do you also make it fun and welcoming? You know, men don't want to feel as if they're coming along to talk about, you know, all the bad things in their lives. We want to engage them in conversations and activities that are fun, but it's also welcoming for them. So it feels like it's built for them. Communicate early with lots of information up front on what to expect. My husband is the epitome of number 3. He is an HGV driver and he needs very clear communication. He needs to know what he's doing, what he's supposed to do, the structure of how to do it as early as possible. You know, 8 years in the military, you know, this is exactly how the military run. The army, you know, when they're protecting people, they're not running around not knowing what they're doing. It's all about communication. It's all about planning up front, given that information that's readable, accessible, and there's structure to it. Building relationships over time. Yeah, we know that, you know, I think we all can be quite good at building quick rapport with people, but for men especially, building these relationships over time really are about building trust. These help to engage men in more longer lasting relationships that go deeper than just being able to build rapport quite quickly. They want to be able to do this using shared interests, and it has to be continuous. So I know it's Men's Health Week and everyone's going, right, let's do a men's health initiative. You know, it doesn't wash with guys. There needs to be continuity. It needs to be regular. It needs to be time and time and time and time and time and time again, so that they have the opportunity to build the relationships, engage in those shared interests, and know that it's going to continue. And the last one in there is to foster a sense of achievement, develop skills, and show progress. You know, we all do like this, but especially men thrive where they feel as if they're engaging in something meaningful. They have a sense of achievement, and they're also able to learn new things and develop skills and actually see the progress that they're making. So if you are thinking about running mental health initiatives, you can use these 5 key principles from the Samaritans research, and I will send you out the link so you'd have that to hand. Anything you want to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, it's something, you just go back to that slide, Emily. Something you said that really resonated with me was the continuity element. ManHealth, we run our sessions 50 weeks of the year. And we regularly get guys who attend groups. Sometimes they go to Spennymoor, sometimes they go to Darlington, but they love that continuity and they love that sense of community that we've built, and that sense of trust. So that's something that really resonated with me. And we do foster that sense of achievement in terms of they can see that they are recovering from whatever condition that they've been diagnosed with, so that you know that it's really interesting. You know, and we do make ManHealth accessible, fun, and welcoming. It's not just a dour group of guys sat in a room. We have some great laughs, some really good laughs, and the guys really enjoy coming. So
thanks, Paul. So we do have a little bit of a video to play for you, and this is from one of the service users at ManHealth. I'm just going to reshare my screen. Paul, do you want to just
just to give you a bit of context, we often ask the guys. We never script the conversations with the guys, but this one I thought was quite informative. This is a conference that Emily and I did, the Mental Health Advocates Conference. It's just about how you can use what we've managed to get at ManHealth to encourage employers to think more about how they can engage men in the workplace and how make their workplaces more mentally healthy. And Neil is an ex-social worker, so very experienced. He's worked with lots of difficulties with families and all sorts. And I thought this video really sums up what we do at ManHealth and the things that we try and encourage.
Thank you. I'll play the video now. Here's Neil.
What does ManHealth mean to me? Well, it's unique. It's a big statement, but it's the most effective mental health service I've come across. Why is it? And I'm not denigrating any of the professionals in mental health services. I've accessed various mental health services before I retired. I used to work in the therapeutic area. But what ManHealth has that they don't have is time. I can come to a ManHealth group once a week for 2.5 hours, twice a week for 5 hours. Any professional would kill to have that amount of weekly time with a client or a service user. And that time is so important. You get to know each other, and the service is run by people who have done the journey, they've been there, they know what it's like. And you end up with a community, you end up with comradeship. There's no sophisticated techniques. Yes, there's useful information, but it's just that being there with people, actually understand, and actually perhaps the only place in your life where you're not judged. There's a line in The Joker about what's the worst.
I just think we've lost Emily there. If you just bear with us a second while we get Emily back. I think her internet must have dropped out or something. Happy to take any questions? I think someone just asked, will this video be shared?
Yes, it's something I have to deal with, but the shame has gone, and that's because I'm not judged, and I'm with a group of guys who've been the journey and know just how I feel. What's the bottom line? I think the bottom line is I'm actually with people who care, and that makes a huge difference to know that people actually care about what's going to happen to you. You know, what's life going to bring you, and that makes them unique. Nobody else can do that, and for that I'm very grateful.
Sorry about,
Well,
sorry about that. Wasn't quite sure what happened. I pressed something else in the background and then you said you'd lost us. Am I back now?
Great.
Okay. I think Neil, oh, can you all hear me now, Paul? Is that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. Just Zoom, it crashed unexpectedly apparently, so I'm glad we're back. But I think what Neil was very clearly saying there was some of the principles that we've just covered around the continuity, the build and trust, and the leadership, I think, of people who facilitate in the sessions have that lived experience as well. So there were some really, really helpful tips in there around kind of leadership as well, and what leadership can look like with regards to these initiatives. So are you okay to cover this slide, Paul?
Of course, yeah. I mean, again, going back to the conference I was a guest at for Emily. We just talked about what makes ManHealth unique, and it's one of the key things is the structure. You know, the structure of what we do, and we genuinely care about the guys who come to our groups. You know, the structure's the same every week across all the groups, so you get that consistency. And one of the most powerful things that's said by the men all the time is that it's a non-judgmental environment. We do not judge them at all. We don't ask them what they do for a living. We know we're not interested. We're just interested in that person, and we genuinely are interested. We don't judge them at all. And the support within the ManHealth groups is it's really unbelievable. If I could, you know, I could encourage you all to attend and see what we do, but the support in the networks is unbelievable. We have chat groups where the guys can chat 24/7, and they chat to each other all the time. If anyone's struggling, someone will ring them, someone will take them out for a coffee. It's that really, really supportive environment, the supportive environment that the guys, as they get older, we know men shred friends, and by the age of 35, evidence shows that men have very, very few friends. What we've done with ManHealth is created that community where these men have that sense of belonging, and they have that. Oops. We're back.
Sorry about that. Zoom kicked us all out again.
Yeah. I'll just catch me breath a second.
Today, isn't it? There we go.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so that really, really safe environment, accessible environments as well. And we really do listen to our men, and we act upon them. ManHealth has evolved so much in the 3 years that we've been running. It looks very, very different now to what it did when we started, because we listen to the guys and we take their advice, and we improve what we do all the time according to their requirements. You know, and that sense of community is just unbelievable, and it's that power of community that's the main thing, and the passion that the guys show for ManHealth is unbelievable. It's just given them that sense of meaning and purpose that it's been lost in our society. And the point I was making when I spoke at the conference with Emily is all these things can be introduced into the workplace. I think we've got away from, when I did my business degree, it was all about people are the most important asset in the organization. We've lost that. We really have lost that. And I think we need to go back to building these relationships, listening to the people in the organization and making them feel that they belong and they have a sense of purpose, which goes back to how it used to be in the 60s and 70s, and really caring about your staff. So I think it's really, really important that, you know, it can be translated what ManHealth does into the workplace for your male staff, to, you know, which will increase productivity. It'll make them more loyal to the company, which is ultimately, what most workplaces want. So this, again, just a quick slide on what we do. I mean, the key thing about our peer support groups is the relationship with our men centered around congruence, empathy, unconditional positive regard, encourage them to move forward, set new goals, do things, and develop relationships that gives their lives real meaning. We have a virtual peer support group on a Sunday night, which anybody can access. Any man over the age of 18 can access our peer support groups. We have guys as young as 18 right up to the age of 86. We have nine groups currently running around County Durham and Northumberland. In the next 6 months, we'll have 10 or 12 groups covering the whole of County Durham. The web chat and connect service via our website 7 nights a week. Again, run by guys with lived experience, trained facilitators, and we offer a range of courses to reduce harmful inequalities in men. We also have a course called Men's Health Champion, where we can come into your workplace and we talk about how you can involve more men in the activities in the workplace and run health campaigns for men. Our contact details are there and our email address is there if anyone wants to get in touch after the meeting, or you can go through Emily and get in touch with us. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. I will send out, I'm not going to go through what our Minds Work do. I will send this information out to you, but I think it's, I think it's given us a couple of minutes for any questions. I am going to follow up with an email. I'll provide you the link to this video as well, so that you can recap on it. The resources that are covered with the CONTINUUM model, I am going to attach that, and I am going to send you a link to the Samaritans research that has literally just come out not so long ago on engaging men in services and initiatives. So I guess it's time to just open the floor a little bit and see if there were any questions in the chat box, or if anybody would like to unmute themselves, feel free to ask a question.
Oh, I'd like to ask one, please.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Straight in there. I'm a support coordinator and I've done support work for far too long. And so I've honed my skills, my trade, and I know how difficult it is working with men when they are struggling with something and the feelings that they have around revealing what that is and how embarrassed they feel afterwards when they've cried. And it's such an upsetting and difficult business, if you like, to support somebody like that. I find it particularly difficult, sorry if this sounds sexist, but I'm not making an apology, but I find it quite difficult being a female supporting a guy. Now, I don't shy away from it, and when I build that relationship with a male, it works. But I do struggle sometimes. It may be just a personal thing, but I do feel that there is that. I don't know if being a female helps in this. I mean, I don't know what your experience would be of this and whether you think I'm just being overly sensitive about it, but I do wonder whether sometimes, like you say, with the peer groups, having a male that's been through it and talking about it in a way, I've seen it happen. I've seen it when I've taken my colleague into a meeting and how they can actually relate to that guy talking. So I don't know, is that going to be, have you known groups of for men's health to be run by females at any time? This is a bit out there to say that, but I just want to say it.
No, not at all. I think that's our unique selling point, is that we are men with lived experience. As a man, when I was struggling with my mental ill health, I found it very, very hard to speak to anyone. And I think, men can relate to other men much easier. Men and women are very, very different. They're totally different species, and they react and think differently. And I think our ability to be able to get down and talk to men, and Emily's been into our groups and seeing it, I think it is much easier for men to talk to other men. And that's a difficulty for men. And we know that 60-70% of counsellors are women. Most people who work in mental health services are women. And I'm just going off the evidence that I get from the groups, but men do find it very, very hard to talk to women because of the stigma attached to their mental illness.
No, I agree with you. I've always sort of stuck my head above the parapet and said the same sort of thing. Although I can get so far, I still know that there is a little bit there about being a female. I mean, some people I find I've got to present myself in a totally different way. I've got to be quite straight, quite direct, and quite simple. I don't know if it's simple or clear, but concise on how I say things without sort of really, just a different approach. So how would, say if we were thinking, we'd like to experiment, try something like that here and see if it would work in our service. We're in supported housing, or I work in supported housing. How would we go about that? Would we be looking at a customer who would just like to lead a group in a very loose way, just for coffee or a meetup, or with a bit of guidance? Or would we be looking at talking to male colleagues to see if any of them would want to start the group?
I think obviously, running a peer support group isn't something you can do. I mean, our peer support group facilitators are very, very well trained before we would allow them to run a group.
Okay.
You need to do some element of training in peer support, because it takes it's a difficult skill to facilitate a group. But yeah, we'd be happy to advise and help on that. That's not a problem. If you get in touch with me, we could advise and I could show you how we train our peer support facilitators.
Thank you.
I can probably add a little additional bits to that. It also depends on the relationship that a man has with a woman. We do know that a lot of men in relationships will rely on their female counterpart for emotional support, probably more so than they would their male friends. So it does actually depend on the dynamics between the relationships as well. I use my husband quite a lot for this, and it really just shows. Honestly, probably no, he wouldn't. I think I learned so much from him. Even 20 years of working in services, I really do learn a lot from my husband. And, it's about understanding men. And I think this is the problem. And this is why we see some of these myths, we're saying, men just need to cry more often, but actually not really understanding why men don't cry as often as women. And, I saw this with my husband. We sat watching something on the telly. I think it was Seaspiracy. Don't watch it if you want to continue eating fish and seafood, because it will put you off forever. I'm bubbling my eyes out, right? Really, really upset by the scenes that I was seeing. And I turned to my husband and I was like, how are you just sat there? How are you not upset? And he said, Emily, just because I'm not crying doesn't mean that I'm not feeling those emotions. And I think this is a level of understanding that we also don't have. I think women think that if a man isn't showing emotion, that they're not feeling it, when actually there is emotion is all internal before it becomes external anyway. So, I think there's this level of understanding. And there was another great little snippet from when my cat died a couple of years ago, and I had this cat for 10 years. I loved him to bits. And, I'm sat crying, holding my dead cat, and Hagen's outside with a shovel digging a hole. He was doing something meaning and practical that he knew could help the situation. And when you begin to really understand men and how they react to these situations, you can then begin to work with them and allow them to actually happen as well, and actually encourage those things to happen. So, I do think there is two sides to think about, but absolutely agree with Paul. If you are going to set up some kind of peer-to-peer support service, it has to be done properly. You must have safeguarding people at the heart of that. This isn't a case of just putting people on a 2-day training course, like a mental health first aid course, and going, there you go away and talk to men about their mental health who may be very vulnerable. So yeah, please do make sure that if you are going to look at running an initiative like that, that it is done properly with structure and ongoing support and monitoring and reviewing. So we do have a question from David. As a sufferer of depression and anxiety, how do you engage employers who struggle with the social stigma of dealing with men who are triggered or have an episode? I think from my perspective, we should have a parity in the workplace with health and safety when it comes to emotional health and safety as well. So when we talk about psychological safety and psychological hazards, we should be thinking about them the same as what we would somebody who was in the workplace who was having a heart attack. Yeah, we would know how to deal with that. There's legislation, there's policies and procedures, it needs recording, people are trained to actually engage and support people when they are struggling like that. So I think the problem with that is that we don't have that parity. So we are still trying to tackle some of the social stigma. But I think having some of that parity and actually treating mental ill health and crisis moments like that, the same as what we would with a physical crisis or a physical safety problem, will also help to tackle that stigma, because it then normalizes it creates parity with the way that we deal with something that we know we deal with quite well, and then kind of takes a lot of that stigma away to say, well, this is what we would do if somebody was having a heart attack. This is what somebody would do if, you know, they were having an episode with diabetes. So I think it's trying to gain some of that parity. Have you got anything to add to that, Paul?
Yeah. I think it's, you know, workplaces are great at sending people on first aid courses because they want to be people to be able to react if someone becomes physically unwell in the workplace and take care of them. But you know, you need to raise awareness in terms of David, an awareness session within the workplace about, you know, what someone who's having an episode, what would they be going through and how would you deal with them? One of the guys in my group told me a story last week. There was a guy in his workplace in Newton Aycliffe who was suffering from real bad anxiety, and which was causing him to go to the bathroom quite a lot. And he got dragged in the office and told off and got disciplined. They didn't even ask him why he was going to the toilet a lot. If they you know, it's that care again and understanding your workforce, and they just asked him. He was really struggling at that point in his life with loads and loads of anxiety, and you know, and he ended up getting disciplined. It's just that lack of personal care and you know, understanding.
Yeah, but you know, also I don't blame people as well, because mental health education and the skills, knowledge and behaviours to actually deal with these situations in the workplace still really haven't reached the levels that they should have. So your question there, David, you know, how do you get evolved to help? I'm not quite sure. I think that might have been a typo, but I think one of the ways that we can actually help employers is you need specialists in to help you. You know, if your IT went down, you wouldn't just be, you know, asking somebody who'd been on a 2-day IT training course to fix your IT systems. This is exactly the same when it comes to culture change around mental health. You need workplace mental health culture change experts. I am plugging ourselves a little bit there, but I think, you know, there is a very clear gap in the skills and qualifications required to actually help organizations to do this. You don't have them internally. They tend to be put on the shoulders of HR to culture change, but generally HR, you know, they're not culture change experts. They don't have high levels of knowledge, skills and experience working in the mental health field. They don't have a lot of education around it as well. So it then becomes much harder for them to do, and yet then becomes easier for employers to just brush it under the carpet. Absolutely. We see this a lot in the logistics industry. Absolutely horrendous. They are at the back of the movement when it comes to mental health in the workplace. Really poor ways of not just creating good work, but then also not dealing with it when their men are seen to be problematic, aggressive, challenging, because they're so stressed with the way that the business is being implemented. Nobody's ringing doing welfare checks on these guys. You know, they're isolated for 5 days a week from friends and family. They don't speak to anyone. You know, it really is an industry that needs to do more. But unfortunately, until it's led from the top, it's very, very difficult to get in, because you need that buy-in. And I think that the way that we're going to get it is the way that it's going now. It's starting to, there's a bit of peer pressure on the certain industries. It's like, well, look at what all these other industries are doing. Why are you not doing it as well? And we'll also start to see people we're already seeing it, but especially in the logistics industry, very male dominated. Young men do not want to go to work. So we have the massive driver shortage, because young men do not see this as work that they want to do, or that the industry will provide them with the benefits, check in on their mental health, you know, help them to develop. So, you know, I absolutely get where you're coming from. And unfortunately, that is a lot of mindset change that we need to get in and tackle. It's
interesting, the construction industry as well, Emily, very male dominated, one of the highest industries of suicide. You know, I think it's the second industry with recording the second highest rates of suicide. You know, it's again very male dominated and men very isolated. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, last year we had around between 6,000 and 6,500 suicides in the UK. 500 of them were from the construction industry who were men. You know, and it starts to create that perfect storm. Call it a perfect storm, because everything that we've talked about today, if you think about the majority of people in the construction industry tend to be self-employed, so a lot of stresses around that. They tend to be men. Working away from home, again, a lot of isolation. We see high levels of drug and alcohol use in the construction industry, very male dominated, and it creates a bit of a perfect storm for unfortunately seeing, you know, such large amounts of suicides. So, you know, feel free to leave at any point. We have gone over time now. I can imagine you're all very busy people. And like I said, we will follow up with the video. So if you do miss anything, you can catch up with questions at the end. Yeah, thanks again, David, for your thoughts on that. You know, I know some absolutely brilliant male counsellors and therapists. You know, they can do it very, 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 very well. Absolutely. You know, there is no difference whatsoever in the level of skills that men can have if they get the right levels of training to go through counselling, definitely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I will follow up with all the information. Hopefully it's just given you a little bit more knowledge around what we're talking about, a little bit more guidance on running some of these initiatives. I am going to follow up with the resources that we've talked about today. Please do get over to ManHealth on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you know, check them out. Press like, keep up to date with what they're doing. It'd be nice for me to plug my bike ride, Emily, wouldn't it?
Oh yes, I think so. Go on then, plug your bike ride.
I am doing a sponsored bike ride on Friday. It's just a short one. I'm going to try and cycle 400 miles in 40 hours. The idea being that to raise awareness if someone dies from suicide every 40 seconds somewhere in the world. So a 400-mile bike ride in 40 hours, starting on Friday night. So anyone who would like to wish me well or sponsor me would be I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
You could do that in your lunch break, man, Paul. Thank you very much to everybody who's attended today. Thanks for hanging around at the end just to talk a little bit as well. So I will follow up. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we will speak to you very, very soon.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.